A billionaire unexpectedly caught a poor little girl protecting his deaf twins, and what he did next shocked everyone, changing all of their lives forever. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Morrison Park as 34-year-old businessman Alexander Hayes stepped out of his silver Bentley. His $1,000 Italian shoes clicked against the concrete pathway as he checked his Rolex, 15 minutes early for his lunch meeting at the Grandview restaurant overlooking the park. Alexander had built his technology empire from nothing, transforming a small software startup into a billion-dollar corporation that employed thousands across America. Success had come at a price, though. Endless meetings, calculated decisions, and a world where genuine human connection felt increasingly rare. As he walked through the park, enjoying the rare moment of solitude, angry voices caught his attention. Near the old oak tree, a group of older boys had cornered 3 small children. Alexander's businessman instincts told him to keep walking. He had a crucial merger to discuss over lunch. But something about the scene made him pause. The smallest of the 3 children, a thin girl with tangled brown hair and worn clothes, stood protectively in front of 2 identical boys who appeared to be around 6 years old. The twins had the same sandy hair and frightened blue eyes, and Alexander noticed they weren't speaking, only making gestures with their hands. "Hey, freaks," shouted the largest bully, a boy who looked about 12. "Can't your weird brothers talk like normal people?" The little girl stepped forward, her small frame trembling but determined. "Leave them alone, Tommy. They didn't do anything to you." "What are you gonna do about it, charity case?" Another boy laughed, pushing closer. "Your whole family's nothing but trouble. No wonder nobody wants you around." Alexander found himself moving closer, his protective instincts overriding his usual caution around strangers. The girl couldn't have been older than 7, but she faced the bullies with a courage that impressed him. "My brothers are not freaks," she declared, her voice shaking with emotion. "They're smart and kind and they understand everything. Just because they can't hear doesn't mean they're different inside." One of the bullies reached toward one of the twins, but the girl quickly positioned herself between them, spreading her arms wide. "Don't touch them." The twin boys watched their sister with obvious adoration, their small hands moving in sign language. Alexander was surprised to see the girl respond fluently, her fingers dancing through complex gestures that seemed to calm her brothers. "Our mama taught us that being different makes you special," she continued, tears threatening to spill from her brown eyes. "She said God made everyone unique for a reason." "Your mama's dead, remember?" Tommy sneered. "Died in that tornado last year. You're just 3 unwanted kids nobody cares about." The cruelty of the words hit Alexander like a physical blow. He watched the little girl's face crumble for just a moment before she straightened her shoulders again. "She's not really gone," the girl whispered, touching a small locket around her neck. "She's still with us, and she'd want me to protect Michael and Matthew no matter what." The bullies seemed to grow bolder, stepping closer to the 3 vulnerable children. Alexander's hands clenched into fists as he realized the situation was escalating dangerously. "Maybe we should teach these deaf kids what real noise sounds like," one of the bullies suggested, clapping his hands loudly near the twins' faces. The little girl immediately moved to shield her brothers, who had started to cry silently, their shoulders shaking with fear. It was then that Alexander noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. The way the girl comforted her brothers, the protective stance, the fierce love in her eyes. It reminded him of someone from long ago. "Stop right there." Alexander's voice cut through the autumn air like a blade. His presence commanded immediate attention as he strode toward the group, his expensive suit and confident demeanor making the bullies take an instinctive step backward. The little girl turned to face him, and for a moment Alexander felt the world tilt. Those brown eyes, that determined chin, the way she held herself despite her obvious fear. Memories crashed through his mind like a violent storm, memories he had buried deep years ago. "Is there a problem here?" Alexander asked, his voice controlled but carrying an undertone of steel that made the bullies shift nervously. "No, sir," Tommy mumbled, suddenly looking much younger than his 12 years. "We were just talking." "Talking?" Alexander raised an eyebrow, moving to stand beside the three children. Because from where I was standing, it looked like 4 older boys were intimidating 3 younger children. That's not talking. That's called bullying. The girl looked up at Alexander with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. She was clearly not used to adults intervening on her behalf, and her protective instincts remained on high alert. "We don't need your help, mister," she said quietly, though her voice shook. "We can take care of ourselves." Alexander's heart clenched at the pride in her small voice, the way she refused to show weakness even in the face of overwhelming odds. Behind her, the twin boys watched the interaction with wide, intelligent eyes, their hands moving in rapid sign language. "I'm sure you can," Alexander replied gently, kneeling down to her eye level. But sometimes even the strongest people need someone in their corner. One of the bullies tried to edge away, but Alexander's sharp gaze stopped him cold. "Where do you think you're going? I believe you owe these children an apology." "Sorry," the boys mumbled in unison, their earlier bravado completely deflated. "Not to me," Alexander said firmly. "To them." As the bullies offered grudging apologies and hurried away, Alexander found himself alone with the 3 children. The little girl still stood protectively in front of her brothers, but he could see her defenses beginning to crack. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Emma," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "And these are my brothers, Michael and Matthew." The twins stepped forward shyly, their hands moving in greeting. Emma translated automatically. "They're saying thank you for helping us." Alexander felt something shift inside his chest as he looked at these 3 brave children. "Tell them it was my pleasure." As Emma translated, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than just coincidence. Something about this little family called to him in a way he couldn't explain, awakening emotions he thought he had lost forever in the pursuit of success and financial security. The autumn wind picked up, rustling the leaves overhead, and Alexander noticed Emma shiver in her thin jacket. The twins moved closer to their sister, seeking warmth and comfort in the way that spoke of years of depending only on each other. "Are you 3 here alone?" Alexander asked, concern evident in his voice. Emma's chin lifted with familiar defiance. "We're not supposed to talk to strangers." "That's very smart," Alexander agreed. "Your mother taught you well." At the mention of their mother, Emma's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "She's watching over us from heaven now." The simple statement hit Alexander harder than any business deal gone wrong. Here were 3 children, faced with unimaginable loss, still standing together with love and courage that put his own privileged struggles to shame. As he looked into Emma's face, a nagging feeling tugged at the back of his mind. Something about her features, her mannerisms, the way she tilted her head when thinking. It all felt hauntingly familiar, like an echo from a past he had tried so hard to forget. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Emma watched the well-dressed stranger with careful eyes, her protective instincts still on high alert despite his kindness. Years of surviving on the edges of society had taught her that adults often made promises they couldn't keep, and that trusting too quickly could lead to heartbreak. "What's that you're wearing around your neck?" Alexander asked gently, noticing how Emma's hand kept returning to touch the small locket. "It was Mama's," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "She gave it to me before the tornado took her away." Alexander's chest tightened as he watched the little girl struggle with emotions too heavy for someone so young. Behind her, Michael and Matthew had begun signing to each other, their small faces etched with concern for their sister. "They're worried about me," Emma translated without being asked. "They always know when I'm sad." "How long have you been taking care of them?" Alexander found himself asking, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Emma's shoulders straightened with pride. "Since Mama died. They're my responsibility now. Mama taught me sign language because she was deaf too. That's how she understood what they needed." The revelation hit Alexander like a thunderbolt. A deaf mother, 3 orphaned children, and a little girl with brown eyes that seemed to look straight into his soul. The pieces of a puzzle he didn't know he was solving began falling into place. "Where do you live?" he asked carefully, trying to keep his voice neutral. Emma's defenses immediately went up again. We have a place. We don't need charity. I wasn't offering charity, Alexander said truthfully. I was just concerned. It's getting late, and the park will close soon. As if summoned by his words, a security guard appeared in the distance, making his evening rounds. Emma noticed him too and quickly took her brother's hands. We should go, she said, but Alexander could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Where exactly would they go? Emma, wait, Alexander said, standing up. I know you don't know me, but I'd like to help. No strings attached, no charity, just one person helping another. Why? Emma asked bluntly. Nobody helps people like us. We're just the poor kids everyone pretends not to see. The honesty in her statement broke something inside Alexander's chest. How many times had he walked past people in need, too focused on his own goals to truly see their struggles? Because once upon a time someone helped me when I needed it most, he said, the words surprising him with their truth. And because your mother would want someone to look out for you three. Emma's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. She used to say that angels come in all shapes and sizes. Maybe you're one of hers. The twins watched the conversation with growing excitement, their hands moving rapidly as they communicated with each other. Emma smiled through her tears as she watched them. They're planning how to thank you properly, she explained. Matthew wants to show you his favorite rock collection, and Michael thinks you might like to see his drawings. Alexander felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't experienced in years. I would love to see both of those things. Really? Emma's face lit up with genuine joy. Most grown-ups don't have time for kid stuff. Then they're missing out, Alexander said sincerely. Some of the most important things in life are kid stuff. As they talked, Alexander found himself studying Emma's features more closely. The shape of her nose, the way her eyebrows arched when she was thinking, the dimple that appeared when she smiled. Everything about her face seemed to trigger half-remembered dreams and long-buried memories. Emma, can I ask you something? Alexander said carefully. What was your mother's name? Sarah, Emma replied immediately. Sarah Louise Chen. She was the most beautiful person in the whole world. The name hit Alexander like a physical blow. Sarah Louise Chen. Images flooded his mind. A young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, long black hair that caught the sunlight, hands that moved gracefully through sign language as she taught disadvantaged children in the community center where they had met 15 years ago. Sarah, who had disappeared from his life without explanation, just when he had been ready to propose. Sarah, who had left behind only a note saying she couldn't be part of his world. Sarah, whose memory he had buried under years of work and success, telling himself he was better off without the complication of love. Your mother, Alexander said, his voice carefully controlled. Did she used to work with deaf children at the downtown community center? Emma's eyes widened with surprise. Yes, how did you know? That was before we were born, though. She told us stories about those days. Alexander's mind raced as he calculated timelines. 15 years ago, Sarah had vanished. 7 years ago, Emma had been born. The math was simple, but the implications were staggering. She talked about it? Alexander managed to ask. All the time, Emma said, her face glowing with love for her mother's memory. She said helping those children was the most important work she'd ever done. She met someone there too, someone special. Alexander's heart pounded so hard he was sure the children could hear it. Someone special? Emma nodded eagerly. A man who was different from everyone else. She said he had big dreams and an even bigger heart, but he lived in a world where people like us didn't belong. The words were like arrows finding their target. Alexander remembered how Sarah had always seemed intimidated by his wealth, his family's expectations, the pressure of his social circle. He had tried to convince her that none of that mattered, but she had never believed him. She never told you his name? Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. She did, Emma said softly. Alexander. She named our stuffed bear after him because she said he made her feel safe. The revelation knocked the breath from Alexander's lungs. All these years he had thought Sarah had simply chosen someone else, had decided their relationship wasn't worth fighting for. But looking at Emma now, seeing the timeline align, He realized the devastating truth. Sarah hadn't left him for another man. She had left because she was pregnant with his daughter. "Emma," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't hide. "I need to tell you something very important." But before he could continue, the sound of sirens filled the air. A police car pulled up to the park entrance, and Alexander saw Emma's face go white with fear. "We have to go," she whispered urgently, grabbing her brother's hands. "Now." "Emma, wait," Alexander called, but the three children were already running toward the back exit of the park. As he watched his daughter, disappear into the gathering dusk with the two boys he now understood were not her blood brothers but her chosen family, Alexander felt a pain deeper than any business loss he had ever experienced. He had found her, only to lose her again in the span of a single moment. But this time he would not let her go without a fight. Alexander spent the next 3 days in a state of emotional chaos that was completely foreign to his usually controlled existence. He canceled meetings, ignored urgent phone calls, and found himself driving through every neighborhood near Morrison Park, searching for any sign of Emma and the twins. His private investigator, James Morrison, had been surprised by the urgency of the request, but had immediately begun working his contacts in social services and local shelters. "Mr. Hayes," James reported on Thursday morning, settling into the leather chair across from Alexander's massive mahogany desk. "I've found some information, but you're not going to like it." Alexander looked up from the stack of documents he hadn't been able to focus on. "Tell me everything." Sarah Chen died 14 months ago in the tornado that devastated the Riverside Mobile Home Park, James began, consulting his notes. She was working a double shift at the local diner when the storm hit. The children weren't with her. They were at a neighbor's house that somehow survived. The pain of knowing Sarah was truly gone hit Alexander with unexpected force. Despite the years apart, some part of him had always harbored hopes of seeing her again, of explaining how much she had meant to him. "The twins, Michael and Matthew Sullivan, are 6 years old," James continued. "They're not related to Emma or Sarah by blood. Their mother, Rebecca Sullivan, was Sarah's best friend and died in the same tornado. Rebecca asked Sarah to take care of the boys if anything happened to her, and Sarah had been their legal guardian for about 2 years before the storm. So Emma is caring for her adoptive brothers," Alexander said, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Exactly, and here's where it gets complicated," James said grimly. "After Sarah's death, the state tried to place all 3 children in foster care, but Emma ran away with the twins before social services could separate them. They've been living off the grid for over a year." Alexander's hands clenched into fists. "You're telling me my 7-year-old daughter has been homeless for over a year?" "There's more, sir. Emma has been incredibly resourceful. She's managed to keep herself and the boys fed and sheltered by doing odd jobs, collecting cans for recycling, and accepting help from a few kind shop owners who know their story. But they're always moving, always staying one step ahead of social services." The image of Emma's fierce protectiveness in the park took on new meaning. She wasn't just being brave for a moment. She had been the sole provider and protector for 3 children for over a year. "Where are they now?" Alexander demanded. "That's the problem," James admitted. "Since your encounter in the park, they've gone completely underground. No one I've spoken to has seen them." Alexander stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. Somewhere out there, his daughter was struggling to survive while he sat in his climate-controlled office, surrounded by luxury she couldn't even imagine. "Sir, there's something else," James said hesitantly. "I spoke with Dr. Patricia Williams, who was Sarah's physician. She confirmed that Emma is indeed your biological daughter." Even though Alexander had suspected this truth for days, hearing it confirmed made his knees weak. He had a daughter. A brave, intelligent, loving daughter who had inherited Sarah's kindness and strength. "Dr. Williams said Sarah made her promise never to contact you," James continued. "Sarah believed that your different social classes would make a relationship impossible, and she didn't want to trap you with an unwanted pregnancy." "Unwanted?" Alexander turned from the window, his voice harsh with pain. "I loved Sarah more than my own life. I would have married her in a heartbeat if she had told me." "She knew that, sir." That's exactly why she didn't tell you. Dr. Williams said Sarah was convinced that forcing you to choose between your family's expectations and her would only lead to resentment and unhappiness for everyone. Alexander sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Sarah had sacrificed. She had given up love, security, and partnership to protect him from a choice she was sure would destroy him. She was wrong, he whispered. She was so incredibly wrong. His phone buzzed with an urgent message from his assistant, but Alexander ignored it. Nothing in his business empire mattered compared to finding Emma and making up for 7 years of absence from her life. "James, I want you to expand the search," Alexander said, his voice gaining strength. "Hire more investigators, contact every shelter and soup kitchen in the city, check with school districts to see if she's tried to enroll the boys anywhere. I want posters made with their pictures, offering a reward for information." "Sir, that might spook them even more," James warned. "If Emma sees wanted posters, she might think she's in trouble and run even farther." Alexander considered this, then had an idea. "What if we approach this differently? Instead of hunting them down, what if we make it safe for them to come to us?" "What do you mean?" "Emma is clearly intelligent and resourceful. She's been providing for 3 children for over a year, which means she knows this city better than most adults. But she's also cautious and protective. If we can prove that we're not a threat, that we're offering genuine help with no strings attached, she might be willing to listen." Alexander's mind began working with the same sharp focus that had built his business empire. "James, I want you to find the soup kitchens and community centers where they might go for meals. Arrange for those places to receive anonymous donations of food, clothing, and supplies. Leave notes saying the donations are in honor of Sarah Chen, and that anyone who knew her is welcome to take what they need." James raised an eyebrow. "You think she'll recognize the connection?" "I'm counting on it. Emma is smart enough to realize that someone who knew her mother's name is trying to help. If we can build trust gradually, she might be willing to make contact. And if she doesn't?" Alexander's jaw set with determination. "Then we keep trying. I've lost 7 years with my daughter already. I'm not losing another day if I can help it." As James left to implement the plan, Alexander found himself staring at a framed photo on his desk. A picture of him and Sarah taken at the community center 15 years ago. They had been so young then, so full of hope and love for each other. Sarah's eyes sparkled with joy in the photo, her hand resting on Alexander's arm as they posed with a group of deaf children they had been teaching. Looking at the picture now, Alexander could see hints of Emma in Sarah's facial structure, the same determined chin and expressive eyes. "I'm going to find her, Sarah," he promised the photo. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for the protection and love you couldn't provide. I swear to you, our daughter will never have to struggle alone again." Outside his office windows, the city continued its relentless pace, millions of people pursuing their own dreams and struggles. But Alexander's world had narrowed to a single purpose: finding 3 children who had stolen his heart and changed his priorities forever. Somewhere in that vast urban landscape, Emma was probably teaching the twins new signs, making sure they were fed and warm, carrying burdens no 7-year-old should have to bear. The thought of his daughter's strength and sacrifice filled Alexander with a mixture of pride and heartbreak that threatened to overwhelm him. But he would find her. He had to. Because some things were more important than business empires and social expectations. Some things were worth changing your entire life to protect. And Emma, Michael, and Matthew were definitely worth everything. 2 weeks after implementing his plan, Alexander received the call he had been desperately waiting for. James's voice was urgent but hopeful when he phoned at 6 in the morning. "Mr. Hayes, we have a lead. The manager at Sacred Heart Community Kitchen says 3 children matching our description have been coming in for dinner every Tuesday and Thursday for the past week." Alexander was out of bed and reaching for his clothes before James finished speaking. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Sir, they're not there now. Dinner service doesn't start until 5 p.m. But Margaret, the kitchen manager, says the little girl always asks about the donations in Sarah Chen's honor. She's been taking extra food packages each time." Alexander's heart pounded with a mixture of hope and anxiety. After 2 weeks of leaving donations at 12 different locations across the city, Emma had finally taken the bait. "Has she said anything else?" Alexander asked, pulling on his jacket. Margaret says the girl is incredibly polite but very cautious. She never stays long and she always positions herself near the exit. The twins apparently draw pictures on napkins while they eat. Margaret has been saving them. The image of Michael and Matthew creating art on napkins while their sister watched for danger made Alexander's chest tighten with emotion. These children had been forced to grow up too fast, to live with a level of vigilance that no child should ever need. "I'll meet you at the community kitchen at 4:30, Alexander decided. "I want to be there early, to observe and plan our approach carefully." "Sir, are you sure about this? If we move too fast, we might spook them again." Alexander paused, understanding James's concern but feeling the urgency of a father who had already missed too much of his daughter's life. "James, Emma has been taking care of 3 children for over a year. She's hungry, tired, and carrying responsibilities that would break most adults. I can't stand the thought of her struggling for even one more day." That afternoon, Alexander found himself sitting in his car across the street from Sacred Heart Community Kitchen, his palms sweating with nervousness he hadn't felt since his first major business presentation 15 years ago. Through the windshield, he watched families and individuals of all ages entering the modest building, seeking warmth and nourishment. Margaret Williams, the kitchen manager, was a sturdy woman in her 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years spent serving others. She had agreed to help with Alexander's plan, understanding the urgency of reuniting a father with his daughter. "They usually arrive around 5:15, Margaret explained as they went over the strategy one more time. "The little girl, Emma, always scouts the area first, then signals for the boys to come in. She's incredibly protective and smart." Alexander nodded, trying to calm his racing heart. In just over an hour, he would see his daughter again. This time, he was determined not to let her disappear. At exactly 5:17, Alexander spotted them. Emma appeared at the corner of the building, her small frame barely visible as she carefully observed the people entering and leaving the kitchen. She was thinner than she had been 2 weeks ago, her clothes more worn, but her posture still carried that remarkable strength he had admired in the park. After a few minutes of observation, Emma made a subtle gesture, and Michael and Matthew emerged from behind a dumpster where they had been hiding. The twins looked tired but alert, their identical faces lighting up as they saw their sister's signal that it was safe to approach. Alexander watched through the kitchen's front window as the 3 children entered. Emma's hand never left the small locket around her neck, and she positioned herself strategically near the exit, while the twins sat at a corner table. "That's them," Margaret whispered, appearing beside Alexander. "Every time she does exactly the same thing. Gets food for all 3, makes sure the boys eat first, then eats whatever's left." Through the window, Alexander could see Emma approaching the serving counter. Margaret had prepared a special meal package as they had planned, extra portions of warm soup, fresh bread, and fruit, along with a carefully worded note. As Margaret handed Emma the package, Alexander saw his daughter's eyes widen as she read the note. Her small hands trembled as she looked around the room, her gaze eventually settling on the window where Alexander stood. For a moment that felt like eternity. Father and daughter stared at each other across the glass. Alexander saw recognition dawn in Emma's brown eyes, followed immediately by a mixture of hope and terror that broke his heart. Emma quickly gathered the twins and headed for the exit, but instead of running as Alexander had feared, she stopped just outside the building. She turned back toward the window, her small hand pressed against the glass, her eyes filled with tears. Alexander stepped outside, moving slowly so as not to frighten her. "Hello, Emma." "You're him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're Alexander, the man from Mama's stories." "Yes," Alexander replied, kneeling down to her eye level despite his expensive suit. "And you're my daughter." The words hung in the cool evening air like a bridge neither of them was sure they could cross. Behind Emma, Michael and Matthew watched the interaction with wide eyes, their hands moving in rapid sign language. "They want to know if you're going to take us away," Emma translated, her protective instincts still on high alert. "I want to take care of you," Alexander said carefully. "All 3 of you. But only if that's what you want." Emma's chin lifted with that familiar defiance, but Alexander could see the exhaustion beneath her brave facade. We don't need charity. We take care of ourselves. I know you do, Alexander said with genuine admiration. You've done an incredible job protecting Michael and Matthew. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you're becoming. At the mention of Sarah, Emma's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she clutched the locket around her neck. I miss her so much, she whispered. Sometimes I don't know if I'm doing everything right. What if I'm not good enough to take care of them? Alexander's heart shattered at the weight of responsibility his 7-year-old daughter had been carrying. Emma, listen to me very carefully. You are not just good enough. You are extraordinary. But you shouldn't have to carry this burden alone. Why didn't you come before? Emma asked, her voice filled with the pain of a child who had felt abandoned. Why didn't you help Mama when she was alive? The question cut deeper than any business failure Alexander had ever experienced. Because I didn't know about you, he said honestly. Your mother never told me she was pregnant. She thought she was protecting me, but if I had known, I would have been there from the very beginning. Emma studied his face with the intense scrutiny of someone much older than her years. Mama said you lived in a different world. She said people like us don't belong with people like you. Your mother was wrong about that, Alexander said firmly. There is no people like us and people like you. There's just family. And you, Michael and Matthew, are my family now. The twins had moved closer during the conversation, their curiosity overcoming their caution. Alexander noticed that Matthew was clutching a small notebook, while Michael had a smooth river rock in his pocket. Is that your rock collection, Michael? Alexander asked, remembering Emma's earlier promise to show him the boy's treasures. Michael's face lit up with surprise and delight. He quickly pulled out several smooth stones, each one carefully polished and unique. His hands moved excitedly as he signed to Emma. He says he found these by the river where we sometimes sleep, Emma translated. He wants to know if you really want to see them. I would be honored, Alexander said solemnly, accepting the precious stones with the reverence they deserved. These are beautiful, Michael. You have excellent taste. Matthew shyly offered his notebook, which was filled with detailed drawings of animals, buildings, and people. Alexander was amazed by the artistic talent displayed in the simple sketches. These are incredible, Matthew, Alexander said, genuinely impressed. You're a real artist. The twins beamed with pride, and for the first time since their encounter began, Emma smiled. It was a small, tentative smile, but it transformed her entire face and gave Alexander a glimpse of the carefree child she should have been allowed to be. Emma, Alexander said gently, I have a proposal for you. I'd like you three to come home with me tonight, not permanently, he added quickly, seeing her alarm. Just for tonight. A warm bed, hot meals, and a chance for us to talk about what happens next. Emma looked at her brothers, who were signing enthusiastically. They want to know if your house has hot water for baths, she translated with a small laugh. It does, Alexander confirmed. And clean clothes and beds with soft sheets and as much food as you can eat. Emma's resolve was clearly wavering, but her caution remained strong. What if we don't like it? What if we want to leave? Then you can leave, Alexander promised. I won't try to stop you or call social services. This is your choice, Emma. It will always be your choice. The little girl looked at her brothers again, then back at Alexander. Can we bring our stuff? Of course, what stuff do you have? Emma led him to an alley behind the kitchen where they had hidden a shopping cart containing their few possessions. A thin blanket, some canned food, extra clothes, and a worn teddy bear that Alexander recognized from Emma's earlier story. Is that the bear named after me? He asked softly. Emma nodded, hugging the stuffed animal protectively. Mama gave him to me when I was little. She said whenever I hugged him, I was getting a hug from someone who cared about us. Alexander felt tears threatening to overwhelm him. Sarah had kept his memory alive for their daughter, even when she believed they could never be together. Well then, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion, I think it's time that Bear met the real Alexander. Alexander's penthouse overlooked the city from the 42nd floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of lights twinkling like earthbound stars. But as he watched Emma, Michael, and Matthew experience his home for the first time, Alexander realized he was seeing his own space through completely new eyes. This is where you live? Emma asked in wonder, standing in the marble foyer with her mouth slightly open. It is, Alexander replied, suddenly seeing the potential intimidation factor of his wealth. But it's just a place to sleep and eat. It's not really a home until you have people you care about to share it with. The twins were already exploring, their silent communication allowing them to coordinate their investigation of this new environment. Matthew was drawn to the wall of books in Alexander's study, while Michael had discovered the telescope positioned near the living room windows. They've never seen anything like this, Emma whispered, watching her brothers with a mixture of joy and concern. Are you sure it's okay for them to touch things? Emma, Alexander said gently, this is their home now too, for as long as they want it to be. They can touch anything they want. Over the next few hours, Alexander watched his daughter and her chosen brothers slowly relax in the safety and comfort of his home. The twins had taken their first hot baths in months, emerging clean and glowing in soft pajamas that Alexander had his assistant rush to deliver. Emma had been more resistant to being pampered, but eventually succumbed to the luxury of a warm shower and clean clothes. Now they sat around Alexander's dining table, which had been set with simple foods he thought children would enjoy: grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup, fresh fruit, and chocolate milk. It was probably the most casual meal ever served in the elegant space, and definitely the most meaningful. Emma, Alexander said as they ate, I'd like to understand more about your life with Sarah. What was she like as a mother? Emma's face softened with love and grief. She was the best mama in the whole world. She worked really hard to take care of us, but she always had time for stories and hugs. She taught me and the boys sign language, and she made us feel special instead of different. Alexander's heart ached as he imagined Sarah struggling to provide for Emma while maintaining the loving, nurturing environment his daughter described. She talked about you sometimes, Emma continued, glancing at Alexander shyly, especially when she was sad. She'd look at your picture in her locket and tell me about a man who had big dreams and an even bigger heart. She had my picture? Alexander asked in amazement. Emma nodded and carefully opened the small locket around her neck. Inside was a tiny photograph. Alexander recognized it as one from their time at the community center, though he couldn't remember when it had been taken. She said you were the only man she ever loved, Emma said quietly. But she thought your families were too different, that you'd be embarrassed of us. Alexander closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the waste of it all. Emma, I need you to understand something very important. I was never embarrassed of your mother. I loved her more than anything in the world, and I would have been proud to spend my life with her. Then why didn't you fight for her? Emma asked with the directness only children possess. The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. Because I didn't know she wanted me to fight. When she left, I thought she had chosen someone else, that I wasn't what she wanted. Emma studied his face with those incredibly perceptive brown eyes. She was scared, she said finally. Mama was brave about everything except believing people could love her. The insight from his 7-year-old daughter was more profound than anything Alexander's therapists or business advisors had ever told him. Sarah had been afraid, not of his love, but of her own worthiness to receive it. Emma, I have something to show you, Alexander said, standing up from the table. He returned a moment later with a small velvet box that he had kept in his safe for 15 years. Inside was an engagement ring, a simple but beautiful diamond set in platinum, chosen specifically because Sarah had once mentioned admiring its understated elegance in a jewelry store window. Emma gasped as she saw the ring. You were going to marry her? I was going to propose the week after she disappeared, Alexander confirmed. I had it all planned. A picnic in the park where we first met with all the deaf children she loved so much as our witnesses. Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks as she realized the magnitude of the tragedy that had shaped all their lives. She never knew. She never knew, Alexander confirmed, his own voice breaking. And I never knew about you. For several minutes they sat in emotional silence, grieving for all the lost time and missed opportunities. Finally, Emma spoke up. What happens now? She asked. To us, I mean. Michael and Matthew and me. Alexander had been thinking about this question constantly since finding them. That depends on what you want, Emma. I know social services has been looking for you three, and legally there are procedures that need to be followed. Emma's face immediately filled with panic. They'll separate us. They said Michael and Matthew need special families because they're deaf and I'd go somewhere else. We'll never see each other again. That's not going to happen, Alexander said firmly. I won't let them separate you. How can you stop them? Emma asked desperately. You're just one person, and they're the government. Alexander smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in weeks. Emma, being successful in business has taught me that there's always a solution if you're creative enough and determined enough. And I have never been more determined about anything in my life. Over the next hour, Alexander outlined his plan. He would immediately begin legal proceedings to adopt all three children. His lawyers had already confirmed that as Emma's biological father, he had strong legal standing and his willingness to keep the siblings together would work in his favor. But what if they say no? Emma worried. What if they think you're not good enough? Alexander laughed, a sound filled with irony. Emma, one of the advantages of being wealthy is that people rarely question your ability to provide for children. The challenge won't be convincing them I can take care of you. It will be convincing them that you want to be taken care of. Emma looked at Michael and Matthew, who had been following the signed translation of the conversation with growing excitement. They want to stay, she said. They like you, and they love the telescope and the books. And what about you? Alexander asked gently. What do you want, Emma? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her small hands fidgeting with her mother's locket. I want to stop being scared all the time, she finally whispered. I want Michael and Matthew to be safe and happy. And I want. She paused, struggling with emotions too big for her small frame. What do you want, sweetheart? Alexander encouraged. I want to have a daddy, she said so quietly he almost didn't hear her. I want to belong somewhere and not have to worry about tomorrow. Alexander felt his heart expand beyond what he thought was possible. Standing up, he knelt beside Emma's chair and very gently took her small hands in his. Emma Louise Hayes, he said formally, would you do me the incredible honor of being my daughter? And would you help me be the father to Michael and Matthew that they deserve? Emma's tears fell freely now, but for the first time since he'd met her, they were tears of joy rather than fear or grief. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Daddy. We want to be your family. As Alexander pulled his daughter into his arms for the first time, he felt Michael and Matthew join the hug, their small arms wrapping around both of them. In that moment, surrounded by these three incredible children, Alexander finally understood what true wealth meant. It had nothing to do with money, power, or social status. True wealth was measured in love given and received, in the trust of children who had learned to hope again, and in the opportunity to build something beautiful from the ashes of loss and regret. The ring that had been meant for Sarah would go back into the safe, a memorial to what might have been. But the love that ring represented would live on in the family they were building together, a family born from tragedy, but nurtured by hope and second chances. Outside the penthouse windows, the city sparkled with infinite possibilities, but Alexander was no longer looking outward. His world had contracted to this perfect moment, holding his daughter while his sons explored their new home with the wonder of children who had finally found their place in the world. 6 months later, Alexander stood in the kitchen of his penthouse watching Emma help Michael and Matthew prepare pancakes for their Saturday morning tradition. The same space that had once echoed with the hollow silence of successful isolation now rang with laughter, signing conversations, and the beautiful chaos of family life. Daddy, Matthew says his pancake looks like a dinosaur, Emma translated, grinning as she flipped her own creation. And Michael thinks yours looks like your hair when you wake up. Alexander laughed, running his hands through his admittedly disheveled morning hair. Tell Michael I'll take that as a compliment to my natural style. The transformation in all three children had been remarkable. Emma had gained weight and lost the hypervigilant tension that had defined her every movement. Michael and Matthew had blossomed in the security of their new home, their artistic talents flourishing with access to proper supplies and encouragement. The legal proceedings had moved more smoothly than Alexander had dared hope. His status as Emma's biological father, combined with character references from respected community leaders, and a home study that revealed the children's obvious happiness and adjustment, had convinced the family court that this unconventional family was exactly what all three children needed. Today marked exactly 6 months since the adoption had been finalized, and Alexander had planned a special celebration. "Are you three ready for our surprise trip?" he asked as they finished breakfast. Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. "Where are we going? You said it was somewhere special." "You'll see," Alexander said mysteriously, though he noticed the twins were already running to get their coats. An hour later, their car pulled up to the downtown community center, where Alexander and Sarah had first met 15 years ago. The building had been renovated and expanded, and a new sign announced it as the Sarah Chen Memorial Center for Deaf Education. Emma gasped as she read the sign. "Daddy, this is where Mama worked." "It is," Alexander confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "And now it's going to be her permanent memorial." He had spent the last 3 months working with the center's board to create a comprehensive program for deaf children and their families. The Sarah Chen Memorial Center would provide free sign language classes, educational support, and family counseling, ensuring that no family would have to face the challenges that Sarah and her children had endured alone. Inside the building, a small ceremony was in progress. Dr. Patricia Williams, Sarah's former physician, was there, along with Margaret from Sacred Heart Community Kitchen and James Morrison, who had become not just an investigator but a family friend. Sarah would be so proud, Dr. Williams told Emma as they toured the new facilities. She always dreamed of a place where deaf children could get the support they needed without having to fight for every service. Emma nodded solemnly, her hand instinctively touching her mother's locket. She would love that other kids won't have to struggle like we did. The ceremony was beautiful but simple, focusing on Sarah's life and dedication rather than on the tragedy of her death. When it came time for Emma to unveil the memorial plaque, Alexander lifted her up so she could reach the blue ribbon. The bronze plaque read, "In memory of Sarah Louise Chen, teacher, mother, and friend to all who knew her. Her legacy lives on in every child who finds their voice here." As Emma read the words aloud for her brothers, Alexander noticed Margaret wiping tears from her eyes. "She was special," Margaret said softly. "Even when she was struggling, she always found ways to help other people. It's beautiful that her daughter has the same heart." That evening, as they returned home, Emma asked to speak with Alexander privately. They sat together on the balcony, looking out over the city lights while Michael and Matthew played with their new art supplies inside. "Daddy," Emma said carefully, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I want to learn everything I can about business," she said with the same determination he'd seen her use to protect her brothers. "I want to help run your company someday, so we can help more families like ours." Alexander looked at his 7-year-old daughter in amazement. "Emma, you don't have to worry about business for many years. You should focus on being a kid." "I know," Emma said seriously, "but I also know that having money means having power to help people, and I want to use that power the way Mama would have wanted." The maturity in her statement reminded Alexander of how much responsibility Emma had carried and how that experience had shaped her worldview. She understood the connection between resources and the ability to create change in ways that most adults never grasped. "If that's what you want," Alexander said, "then I'll teach you everything I know. But first, I want you to have a childhood. I want you to play and laugh and be carefree for a while." Emma smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I am being a kid, Daddy, but I'm also being myself. And myself wants to make sure no other kids have to be as scared as we were." Inside the penthouse, they could hear Michael and Matthew's delighted laughter as they discovered new art techniques in their workbooks. The sound filled Alexander with a deep contentment he had never imagined possible. "Emma," he said, "there's something I want you to have." He pulled out the small velvet box containing Sarah's engagement ring. "This was meant for your mother, but I think she would want you to have it now." Emma opened the box with reverent care, her eyes wide as she saw the beautiful ring. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Your mother was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen," Alexander said softly. "And she gave me the most precious gift imaginable, you." Emma carefully closed the box and hugged it against her chest. Will you tell me more stories about her? About when you were young and in love? I'll tell you every story I can remember, Alexander promised. And when you're older, if you want to visit the places where we spent time together, we'll do that too. As father and daughter sat together under the stars, Alexander reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a successful but lonely businessman, focused entirely on profit margins and market shares. Today, he was a father to 3 remarkable children, a custodian of Sarah's memory, and a man who finally understood what truly mattered in life. The tragedy that had taken Sarah and scattered her children had also led to this beautiful redemption, a family built on love, loss, and the courage to hope for better days. Emma's bravery in protecting her brothers had saved not just their little family, but had also saved Alexander from a life of empty success. "Daddy?" Emma said sleepily as the evening grew late. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Mama knows about us being together now?" Alexander looked up at the stars, thinking of Sarah's selfless love and the incredible daughter she had raised. "I think she knows, Emma, and I think she's very, very proud of the woman you're becoming." As they went inside to join Michael and Matthew for bedtime stories, Alexander felt Sarah's presence in the laughter of their children, in the warmth of their new family traditions, and in the love that had conquered fear, loss, and years of separation. The little girl who had stood so bravely in Morrison Park, protecting 2 deaf boys from bullies, had taught a billionaire the true meaning of wealth, and in return, she had gained not just a father, but a lifetime of security, love, and the power to help other families find their own happy endings. Some stories end with justice. Others end with love. The best stories like theirs end with both, and with the promise of many more chapters yet to be written.